You're going to throw a die 4 times or 4 dice once. Same thing. Either way, you're going to get the results from 4 different tosses. Now, you have a starting point always. Your starting point, 9 times out of 10, doesn't even have a label. It's just, this is your starting point. So in this case, when we throw the die the first time, there are 2 possible outcomes. It can land on a head or it can land on a tail. So you draw 2 lines coming from your starting point, and you might want to label them heads and tails. Now, the second die can also land on heads or tails. Now, it has nothing to do with how the first one landed. So if the first one landed on a head, the second one can still land on a head or a tail. If the first one landed on a tail, that has no effect. The second one can still land on a head or a tail. So this particular line would represent 2 heads. This would be head, head. This one coming up and then down would be a head and a tail. This one would be first a tail and then a head. And this one down here would be 2 tails. Now, whether you count having 1 head and 1 tail count as 2 completely different outcomes depends on what you're counting. But typically, to start with, we'll go ahead and say this is 4 possible outcomes. You can have head, 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 tail, tail, head, tail, tail. Now, the third one. Well, the third one could land on a head or a tail, right? Has nothing to do with the outcome of the first 2. And I'm going to have a really hard time trying to squeeze an extra set of lines in here. So if we had heads on the first 2, we could still have a head on the second one or a tail on the second one. If we started out with a head and then a tail, we could still have a head on the third one or a tail. Again, the tail-head combination with the third one could result in a head or a tail, and the tail-tail could result in a head or a tail. So now, after 3 tosses, we now have 8 possible outcomes. And then on the 4th toss, once again, it could be a head or a tail, head or a tail, head or a tail, head or a tail. I'm going to squeeze this in, head or a tail, head, tail, head, tail, head, tail. So after 4 tosses, we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So with 1 toss, there were 2 outcomes. 2 tosses. That left 1, 2, 3, 4 outcomes. 3 has a possibility of 8 outcomes. And at 4, we have a possibility of 16 outcomes. So each time it's doubling, but it's doubling because there are 2 outcomes. This 4 tosses is actually 2 outcomes from the first combination, 2 outcomes from the second, 2 outcomes from the third, and 2 outcomes from the fourth. Now, what if we had a situation where we had 4 possibilities for the first outcome and 3 possibilities on the second? I don't know, it could be absolutely anything. So you've got, they come up with these problems where they say they've got a dice that's got 3 sides to it. Physically, that's not even possible. So we won't get into an argument about that. But regardless of how that works, if there are 4 possibilities, that means we're going to draw 4 lines from our starting point. Got it? So 4 possibilities, you got 4 possible outcomes. If there are 3 ways that the second thing can land, so it could land on a 1 or a 2 or 3, then that means there are 3 possibilities for this, 3 possibilities for this, 3 here, and 3 here. So if there are 4 possible ways for the first thing to turn out, and then 3 possible ways for the second thing to turn out, and the way the first thing happened has no effect on the fact that there are 3 ways the second thing can happen, notice that we end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. How do you get a 12 from a 4 and a 3? You multiply. So a tree is always going to have a starting point. And although I don't suppose we have to, they typically draw the lines going off to the right. They could start at the bottom and draw lines coming out, which would actually look a lot more like a tree. But that's basically the way it works. So let me know if this helps you out. I hope it does. And we'll talk to you later. Bye.